Burkina Faso is not rich. It has no oceans to trade across, no towering skylines of glass and steel, and no endless vaults of foreign capital. Yet from this landlocked soil has risen a plan that shocks the imagination. To build 1,000 kilometers of roads, not with machines worth millions, but with bare hands, red earth, and bags filled with resolve. For decades, the villages of this nation have been left isolated. Markets cut off, hospitals too far, schools beyond reach. Aid promised, aid delayed, aid forgotten. But here, something different is unfolding. A simple Japanese technique, Do Nou, meaning soil and bags, has become the seed of a revolution. Compacted by hand, row after row, these earthen bags turn into pathways that carry not only footsteps, but the weight of dignity. And at the heart of this vision stands Ibrahim Traoré, a leader who refuses to wait for saviors from abroad. He asks his people to build with their own hands what history has long denied them: connection, security, and pride. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. Subscribe to stand with the story. In a world where asphalt highways and steel bridges are symbols of progress, the very idea of building roads by hand may sound archaic, almost absurd. Yet in Burkina Faso, this apparent step backwards is a step forward, one that might change the course of the nation's destiny. The technique at the center of this bold experiment is Do Nou, a Japanese innovation whose meaning is as humble as its method: soil and bags. The method itself is deceptively simple. Soil is carefully selected, most often the red laterite that dominates the landscape of Burkina Faso. It is poured into sacks, moistened just enough to bind, and then compacted. 20 precise strikes with a hand tamper to ensure uniform density. Each bag becomes a brick, a block, a heartbeat of the road. These bags are then laid in rows, layered like the courses of a wall, and finally covered with gravel or additional soil. When completed, they transform from mere sacks of dirt into a sturdy pathway that vehicles and people alike can travel. What makes this remarkable is not only the technique's simplicity, but its radical accessibility. No bulldozers, no rollers, no concrete mixers, no endless queues of tenders and inflated contracts. Just local labor, a few hand tools, and the will to move forward. In a nation where more than 60% of the population lives in rural areas, where agriculture feeds the economy, but farmers are often trapped by isolation, such a road is not a luxury. It is the very artery of survival. Consider the map of Burkina Faso, a patchwork of villages spread across a vast Sahelian plain. In many of these villages, the harvest rots before it can reach the market, not because the soil failed, but because the road did not exist. Children walk for hours to reach schools. Pregnant women ride bicycles or donkey carts to reach distant health centers. Traders turn away because the paths are too treacherous. Infrastructure is not an abstract concept here. It is the line between opportunity and despair. Against this backdrop, the government under Ibrahim Traoré has set a goal that borders on audacious: 1,000 kilometers of rural roads. The figure is more than a number. It is a declaration that isolation will no longer be the destiny of the Burkinabe people. And the choice of Do Nou is not a matter of convenience, but of necessity. With limited financial resources and restricted access to heavy machinery, traditional road-building methods would stall, if not collapse entirely, under the weight of their own expense. Do Nou turns scarcity into strength. Instead of waiting for contractors who might leave unfinished projects and swollen bills, the people themselves become the builders. Local youth, often unemployed and restless, are mobilized to earn income by shaping the very roads that will connect their future. It is development not imposed from above, but built from below, one tamped sack at a time. The symbolism here is profound. Hands that were once idle become instruments of nation building. The method is also scalable. A single community can complete a section, and when that section ends, another begins. Piece by piece, kilometer by kilometer, the dream of 1,000 kilometers can advance steadily. The soil of Burkina Faso becomes both the problem and the solution. What once hindered travel becomes the very material of connection. In this vision, every bag of compacted earth is not just infrastructure, it is a seed that, when planted in rows across the land, germinates into a harvest of dignity, unity, and resilience. Roads are often called lifelines, but here they are more than that. They are proof that progress does not have to wait for foreign capital, nor bend to the machinery of dependency. But this was not just about roads, it was about rewriting the destiny of a people. The sound of progress in Burkina Faso is not the roar of engines, but the rhythm of hands striking tampers into soil. It is the thud of 20 blows per sack, repeated thousands of times, echoing across villages. What might appear monotonous is, in truth, a chorus, a symphony of resilience composed by ordinary citizens. Unemployed youth, once stranded in the uncertainty of idleness, now earn wages by building what their parents only dreamed of, real roads that bind their communities together. Their labor is not charity, not a handout, but a transaction of dignity. Sweat exchanged for wages, time exchanged for legacy. As they press soil into sacks, they press despair into hope. In the villages, the atmosphere transforms. Where once there was silence broken only by the rustle of dry grass, now there is noise. The chatter of youth working side by side, the laughter of neighbors sharing food during breaks, the measured beat of tampers shaping the earth. Children watch with wide eyes, knowing these roads will shorten their own weary walks to school. Farmers see beyond their fields, imagining their maize and millet carried swiftly to markets instead of spoiling at home. Mothers breathe easier, for when illness strikes, the hospital is no longer an unreachable destination. But perhaps the most striking aspect is ownership. When a contractor paves a road, it belongs to the state. When the people lay it with their own hands, it belongs to them. This sense of ownership translates into responsibility. The same hands that built will repair, ensuring longevity far beyond what outside projects often deliver. For the first time, infrastructure feels intimate, woven into the daily life of the community. Yet the significance of these roads extends beyond the villages themselves. Burkina Faso lies in the volatile Sahel region, a zone where terrorist groups and armed insurgencies thrive on isolation and poverty. Roads are not just arteries of commerce here. They are corridors of security. A military convoy that once took days to reach a remote outpost may now arrive in hours. Emergency response, once paralyzed by impassable terrain, gains a new edge. In this way, every tamped sack is also a weapon, a defense against instability. President Ibrahim Traoré understands this dual nature. He does not speak of roads as mere infrastructure. He frames them as shields, as tools of sovereignty. By empowering citizens to build, he strengthens both the social fabric and the national shield. In his vision, a kilometer of road is not just measured in asphalt or gravel, but in the confidence it instills in the people. The international community, however, remains largely silent. There are no headlines in Washington or Brussels celebrating villagers stacking soil into bags. To outsiders, it may seem too small, too primitive, too local to matter. And yet, for those who live the reality of isolation, it is monumental. The world measures progress in skyscrapers and GDP. Burkina Faso measures it in minutes saved, harvests sold, and lives rescued. This contrast itself is a story, the dissonance between global indifference and local triumph. Each strike of the tamper is not only on the soil, it is on the silence of neglect. The question now is not whether Burkina Faso can build these roads, but whether the world will acknowledge the dignity in how they are built. Yet as the drums of progress beat louder, another question emerged. Who outside Burkina Faso was listening? The first impact of these earthen roads is immediate and tangible: jobs. For a nation with a youthful population and high unemployment, every project becomes both an income stream and a school of skills. Young men and women who once drifted between uncertainty and frustration now stand side by side, learning to measure, to tamp, to build. A week's labor translates into food on the table, fees for schooling, and a newfound sense of purpose. This is not just labor, it is participation in a national story. As the roads stretch further, the second wave of effects begins to unfold. Trade. Farmers who once lost half their harvest to spoilage can now transport maize, sorghum, and millet quickly to nearby markets. Merchants who once hesitated to reach isolated communities find new customers. This circulation of goods ignites a circulation of opportunity, feeding not only stomachs, but also aspirations. A basket of tomatoes carried more swiftly becomes more than produce. It is a symbol of connection. Education, too, is transformed. For countless children, the road is the line between attending school and staying home. What once required a 3-hour trek under a burning sun can now be reduced to a single hour on a smoother path. Teachers, often reluctant to serve in hard-to-reach areas, now accept postings with less hesitation. The road is not merely a strip of compacted earth. It is a bridge between ignorance and knowledge. Healthcare follows the same pattern. For expectant mothers, the difference between life and death often depends on time. When the nearest hospital is across terrain too rugged for vehicles, the clock becomes a merciless enemy. A road shortens that distance, buys those precious minutes, and saves lives. In rural clinics, medicines arrive faster, doctors travel more easily, and hope is no longer a rare commodity. But the consequences are not only civil, they are profoundly political. By decentralizing the responsibility of building roads, the government hands power to local communities. Villages once resigned to waiting for distant ministries now command agency. They do not plead for aid, they act. This is more than development policy. It is a rebalancing of authority. A country long overshadowed by external influence begins to prove that sovereignty is not negotiated in boardrooms, but hammered into the soil by its own people. This is where the project takes on continental resonance. When Burkinabe youth stand under the sun, tamping soil into bags, they are not only shaping roads, they are shaping a narrative of resistance. In many ways, it is the living embodiment of anti-colonial Africa, not in slogans, not in rallies, but in practice. By rejecting the model of dependency and embracing a method born from simplicity and discipline, Burkina Faso declares, "Development does not need to be imported. It can be grown from the ground beneath our feet." Such a shift carries political weight. It strengthens the legitimacy of leadership when citizens see tangible results instead of broken promises. It restores trust in governance when communities are invited to participate directly. And it reinforces sovereignty in the most concrete way, through infrastructure that belongs not to creditors or contractors, but to the people themselves. Of course, challenges remain. Do Nou roads cannot withstand the heaviest of vehicles. They demand periodic maintenance. But this too becomes part of the political reconfiguration. Instead of outsourcing responsibility, citizens themselves monitor and repair, creating a cycle of shared stewardship. Maintenance is not an expense. It is a reaffirmation of belonging. The longer-term effect may be the most profound, a change in mindset. A nation accustomed to waiting for aid begins to believe in its own agency. A people accustomed to being spoken for begins to speak in the language of roads, markets, and schools. This is sovereignty forged not by decree, but by daily practice. But could this small, landlocked nation carry its burden alone in a turbulent world? While the villages of Burkina Faso resound with the sound of tampers, the corridors of international power remain strangely quiet. The African Union praises innovation in abstract terms, but offers little in the way of concrete partnership. ECOWAS, often quick to impose sanctions on political matters, offers only cautious observation. Brussels views the experiment with curiosity, yet doubts its scalability. For Washington, the focus remains narrowly framed. Terrorism in the Sahel, migration routes, and the preservation of its own strategic footprint. And yet behind this silence lies unease. For decades, development in Africa has been tethered to a familiar script: foreign loans, foreign contractors, foreign machines. Burkina Faso, by contrast, is sketching a different script: one that challenges the hierarchy of dependency. It asks a provocative question. If development can be driven by local hands and simple techniques, what then becomes of the global industry of aid? International media too hesitates. Stories of skyscrapers in Dubai or high-speed trains in Morocco captivate global attention. But 1,000 kilometers of earthen roads built by villagers? It does not fit the usual narrative of modernization. To dismiss it as primitive, however, is to misunderstand its true power. This is not regression, it is adaptation. It is not weakness, it is will. For the United States, the paradox is sharp. On one hand, Washington frames itself as a champion of democracy and development in Africa. On the other, a movement of self-reliance, fueled by local communities, sidelines the very aid machinery America has invested in for decades. To endorse Do Nou openly would be to validate a path that diminishes dependency on external actors. To oppose it would be to stand against the very people it claims to support. Hence, silence becomes the default. But within Africa, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. Burkina Faso is not simply laying roads, it is laying down an argument that sovereignty is not gifted by treaties or guarded by speeches, but built by citizens in sweat and soil. It is the living embodiment of African sovereignty, forged not in summit halls, but on village tracks where farmers, teachers, and soldiers walk together. And so, as the red earth of Burkina Faso hardens into pathways, the global order faces an uncomfortable reflection. Perhaps the greatest threat to the old system of aid is not defiance shouted from podiums, but quiet resilience demonstrated on the ground. The world watched, but the soil itself carried the louder voice. The road ahead for Burkina Faso is not yet paved with certainty, but it is marked by possibility. If the vision of 1,000 kilometers becomes reality, the nation will possess not just new infrastructure, but a new identity. Villages once cut off will pulse with activity. Markets will hum with trade. And the country will no longer be described merely as landlocked, but as life-linked. The opportunities are immense. A functioning rural network reduces transport costs, stimulates agricultural production, and draws youth away from idleness towards meaningful labor. It nurtures pride, the sense that progress is not imported in containers, but harvested from the soil itself. For a generation accustomed to seeing their future in migration abroad, these roads can become proof that destiny can also be shaped at home. Yet there are challenges. Do Nou roads, by their nature, demand maintenance. They cannot withstand the weight of heavy trucks for long stretches, nor can they promise the lifespan of asphalt. Without continuous local stewardship, they risk crumbling under time and weather. But herein lies both a risk and an opportunity. Rather than wait for external contractors, communities themselves must take responsibility for repairs. In doing so, they reaffirm the very ethos of the movement: self-reliance, shared duty, and resilience. The broader horizon is continental. If Burkina Faso proves that 1,000 kilometers can be built with this technique, what stops Mali, Niger, Chad, or even larger economies from adapting it? Across Africa, isolation remains one of the deepest roots of poverty. To show that an affordable, community-driven method can break that cycle is to offer not just a model, but a message. Progress need not be delayed by dependency. The metaphor could not be clearer. Each road is a light through the forest of adversity, a bridge across the gulf of neglect. The future of Burkina Faso is not only in the capital Ouagadougou, but in the dusty tracks where villagers tamp soil into history. And perhaps the greatest significance is this: the project is not merely national, but continental in its implication. And so the question remained: was this only the road of Burkina Faso, or the beginning of a continental journey? In the end, the story of Burkina Faso's 1,000 kilometers is not a tale of machines or contracts, but of hands and soil. It is the story of a nation that chose not to wait, not to beg, but to act. Each tamped sack is more than infrastructure. It is defiance, dignity, and determination pressed into form. What emerges from this experiment is larger than any kilometer count. It is a reminder that progress is not measured only by glass towers or digital networks, but by the ability of a people to carve their own path. When communities rise to build what was once thought impossible, they announce to the world that development does not always flow from the top down. Sometimes it begins from the ground up. This is why Burkina Faso's effort resonates beyond its borders. It is not merely about roads, it is about reclaiming destiny. It is about resisting the narrative that Africa must forever be a recipient rather than a creator. In this sense, the Do Nou movement becomes part of a larger struggle, an echo of anti-colonial Africa, not in rallies or revolts, but in roads and resilience. For every kilometer laid, a new chapter opens, and in that chapter lies the possibility of something greater than Burkina Faso alone. A continental reawakening. If one small, landlocked nation can prove that self-reliance works, what then prevents others from following? The soil may be red, the bags humble, but the message is powerful. It is a call to sovereignty not written in treaties, but inscribed in the very earth. That is the essence of African sovereignty, a continent charting its own future, step by step, sack by sack. So as the dust settles on each new road, one truth remains. This is more than infrastructure. It is a movement. It is anti-colonial Africa in practice, and a promise that the destiny of a people need not be outsourced. If this resonates with your sense of justice, do not walk away. Subscribe, share, and add your voice to this journey, for the road ahead is long, and every witness strengthens its stride.